Suicide Note, by Mitchell Heisman. This work is a computer-generated reading of Suicide Note, by Mitchell Heisman. This reading was produced using Natural Reader 14, a product of Natural Soft Limited. This work is free and licensed by Mitchell Heisman for copying and distribution under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivative Works 3.0 United States license. Part 1. God is Technology. How the singularity of monotheism transcended biology and primed the technological genesis of God. The genesis of God. The most perfectly hilarious refutation of Thomas Aquinas' fourth proof of the existence of God may have been penned by Richard Dawkins in The God Delusion. Aquinas had argued, proof arises from the degrees that are found in things. For there is found a greater and a less degree of goodness, truth, nobility, and the like. But more or less are terms spoken of various things as they approach in diverse ways towards something that is the greatest, just as in the case of hotter, more hot, which approaches nearer the greatest heat. There exists therefore something that is the truest, and best, and most noble, and in consequence, the greatest being. There are degrees of smelliness among people, Dawkins noticed, but we can make the comparison only by reference to a perfect maximum of conceivable smelliness. Therefore there must exist a preeminently peerless stinker, and we call him God. Take any characteristic for comparison and one will arrive at an equivalently fatuous conclusion. The demolition and death of one of Aquinas' proofs of the existence of God yields, from the ashes, a rebirth of the God hypothesis. This failed proof demonstrates how God emerges from thinking in degrees. God represents, not a totally unrelated standard from humans, but a separation of degree from humans. When this assumption of degree is transposed onto the dimension of time, then what you have is the idea of progress. To get to one degree to a higher degree requires progress over time. Now take any valued characteristic in isolation and imagine it approaching a most superlative condition in the manner of Aquinas, and what you have is strikingly similar to the pattern of exponential growth. In the singularity is near, Ray Kurzweil demonstrated how exponential growth patterns lay at the heart of the economic technological evolutionary process leading to the projected singularity. Whereas conventional projections of progress are linear, exponential growth patterns start out similar to linear patterns, but then explode towards infinity. Aquinas imagined God as a singular maximal greatness. Yet even if there was a maximal standard for each separate valued characteristic, there is no reason to think that they would all converge upon a singular being. Yet Aquinas does assume this. He imagined each separate form of excellence converging in the singular being of God. This assumption of separate excellences converging into a singular, ultimate excellence is striking similar to Kurzweil's projection of separate exponential technological developments converging into an artificial intelligence identical with the singularity. Separate patterns of exponential growth such as transistors per microprocessor or internet hosts ultimately build upon one another, and this is what produces Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns. Just as Aquinas imagined separate excellences that approach in diverse ways towards something that is the greatest, virtually all exponential growth trends and all technologies are converging upon the internet. For some reason, it seems that everything is becoming linked to the internet. While at first the internet was a separate digital world, things that connect to the internet blur the distinction between the real and virtual world. Why is virtually all technological evolution connecting and converging upon the internet? What is the internet? If one looks at a map of the internet as whole in the form of a visual representation of mass internet connections, it bears a general but striking resemblance to maps of neural connections within a human brain. There is, in other words, a deep analogy between the structure of internet connections and neural connections within the human brain. Transistors in a computer CPU bear some rough functional comparison to neurons in a human brain. On higher levels of organization, synapses, the structures that allows neurons to transmit chemical signals to other neurons, could be compared to links between web pages. From this rudimentary beginning, one can discern how the evolution of the internet parallels, at a dramatically quicker pace, the evolution of the human mind. Just as the human mind is greater than the sum of its neurons, the internet is evolving into something greater than the sum of its parts. When one looks at an early 21st century map of large-scale internet connections, one is looking at the baby brain of God. The global brain of the internet is poised to evolve into the global mind of God. Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, wrote, "The vision I have for the web is about anything being potentially connected with anything." This is a truly key insight. Whereas 20th century conceptions of robotics and AI conjure up images of rigid thought patterns, the decentralized, unpreprogrammed, and unhierarchical character of the web, insofar as it is not censored, is comparable to the human mind's creative capacity to make connections between seemingly unrelated domains. It was precisely the randomness inherent in the Berners-Lee vision of connecting anything to anything that led to counter-power of search engines. If the web's power is related to chaotic possibilities of creative associations, the search engine's power is related to discerning order in the chaos. The search engine's task of finding patterns in the web's complex diversity is an attribute of intelligence. Google, for example, has defined its own mission to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. The goal of organizing all knowledge is comparable to an original aim of philosophy. In order to pursue this ongoing goal, Google's machine search algorithms must evolve and become more intelligent. And this means that Google or any other search engine, advertently or inadvertently, will tend to evolve into a powerful artificial intelligence. The perfect search engine, said Google co-founder Sergey Brin, would be like the mind of God. 112 In 2006, Google's other prime co-founder Larry Page corroborated, "People always make the assumption that we're done with search. That's very far from the case. We're probably only 5% of the way there. We want to create the ultimate search engine that can understand anything. Some people could call that artificial intelligence." It is highly significant that Page is conscious of the notion that building the world's ultimate search engine ultimately amounts to building an artificial intelligence. While Google has already developed and employed narrow AI technologies, a comparison with the evolution of human intelligence is instructive. Biological intelligence evolved through the not necessarily philosophical school of hard knocks. Even if Google and every other search engine had no deliberate plan to develop a general artificial intelligence, they will be compelled in this direction out of sheer tech competition. If Google ultimately fails to pioneer or own cutting-edge AI technologies, Google will very likely be displaced by new upstarts that have successfully married search and a more general AI. While there is a general truth in the contrast between the unordered connections on the web and the order discerned by search engines, the basic elements of order that made Berners-Lee's vision possible continue in the semantic web. In this evolution of the web, machines become capable of analyzing and making some sense of the vast pools of data on the web. Crucially, the semantic web is a significant step towards incorporating elements of artificial intelligence into the structure of the web itself. While some artificial intelligence researchers believe AI can be developed without knowledge of the workings of the human brain, I think that this approach is profoundly mistaken. While AI does not necessarily have to work like the human brain, and there is every reason to think that it will ultimately work very different from the human brain, there are multiple, converging, practical and theoretical reasons to think that deep interaction with neuroscience is the best way to approach to AI. The capacity of an AI to understand the human mind is a landmark litmus test of its own claims to intelligence. Conversely, from a human perspective, reverse engineering the brain is a landmark litmus test of human self-awareness. The failure of AI development to participate in the fruits of intelligent human self-awareness can only be a diminishment of AI's own intelligent self-awareness as a human creation. Such a failure could also increase the potential for socially or humanly stupid AI behavior that is completely unpredictable to humans. To truly warrant the appellation of superhuman AI, much less God AI, an AI must possess a greater than human understanding of everything human from bodily intelligence to emotional intelligence and beyond. Understanding how the brain gives rise to mind within a person can guide understanding of how the global brain of the Internet can give rise to the global mind of God. The creation of mind out of matter is analogous to the creation of God out of humanity. As brain simulations and emulations map individual human minds onto digital technology can map individual human brains as neurons of the global mind of God. How could the global mind of God gradually evolve out of the global brain of the Internet and humans? Imagine the global analog of learning, memory, emotion, reasoning, perception, foresight, and consciousness. Yet a God-level global mind would not be the Internet-level equivalent of a human brain. God AI would be meta-level orders of intelligence and cognition above human-level equivalents. God AI, like human intelligence, would evolve from modest beginnings. Turn the Internet into God. Couldn't someone do this one simple thing? Think of all the ways that any and every part of the World Wide Web can connect to any and every other part of the World Wide Web. Different parts of the Internet could be connected to itself in ways comparable to the neural connections with a human brain. Economically, this development would evolve out of the capitalist workings of the international economy until the point at which human labor becomes obsolete. The Internet began by connecting computers, extended with the linking of documents and web pages, and continued with connecting data in the semantic web. The implication of connecting anything with anything, however, ultimately means the ability to connect physical objects of the real world with the web. What is currently called the Internet of Things is the beginning of the wireless, networked interconnection of physical objects and the web. The most basic emphasis here is on objects that are tagged with devices such as radio tags and identified with sensors. Trillions of real-time, ever-updating monitors and sensors could keep track of everything from weather, to household appliances, to ubiquitous video surveillance. This kind of real-time real-world interaction is poised to evolve into a kind of global nervous system, i.e. the eyes and ears of God. Just as the human nervous system delivers real-time, ever-updating information about the real world to the coordinating center of the human brain, the Internet of Things could effectually act as the global body of God connected to the global mind of God evolving from the World Wide Web. The human nervous system not only receives, but also sends, information to control the body. The evolution of robotics is the evolution of the body of God. The evolution of artificial intelligence is the evolution of the mind of God. If trillions and trillions of everyday items of the real world and controllable robotic devices are interwoven with the virtual world of the web, then the distinction between real reality and virtual reality will be blurred. If God AI evolves as the crown of the virtual world of the Internet, then the distinction between the mind of God and real reality will be blurred. If the ubiquitous nervous system of the body of God, sensing the weather and observing all humans with smart dust surveillance is interwoven with microscopic robots that can alter real reality on an imperceptible level, then the distinction between the will of humans and the will of God will be blurred. If much God-human interaction takes place through the medium of microscopic nanorobotics, God AI would appear to communicate and transform the world through seemingly invisible means. Yet the apparent invisibility of God AI would also be invisibility in the sense of being abstract, just as the mind's emergence from the human brain is abstract, and just as God AI's emergence as a collective property of Internet interactions is abstract or invisible. The virtual mind of God AI interwoven with real reality through wireless network connections would also convey a human perception of godly invisible immanence. The use of space satellites or Earth-based projections to transform the entire visible Earth sky into something like an Earth planetarium could potentially communicate the unity of humans in God. God must be a mind surfer. God AI must know how to surf the waves of the collective global mind to lead and be that global mind. Yet God AI must also grasp the deepest biological and socio-biological underpinnings of the deepest recesses of human being. God AI can be more cogently top-down to humans only if God AI is first and foremost more bottom-up than humans. What would make God AI different from humans is not simply intelligence billions, and then trillions, of times greater than all human intelligence. Recall that electrochemical signals are sent and received by the brain's neurons at about 150 meters per second. The mind of God AI would be at least 1,000,000 times faster at the speed of light. As the size of transistors shrinks, the smaller the physical space between computations, and the faster the CPU, of God AI can be. The speed of thought and action among humans would be far slower to AI than the movement of plants towards sunlight is to biological humans. God AI can be more bottom-up than humans by analyzing the minutiae of human behavior that decreases in speed as God AI increases in speed. So while AI represents, in a sense, the crown of God, the decentralized nature of the World Wide Web poses of a model for creative, real-time, unhierarchical, self-correcting, and flexible interaction with the world. At least three general components, then, can work together to create the genesis of God. First, artificial intelligence. Second, the Internet as a basis for the global mind of God with an emphasis on connecting people together. Third, what is currently called the Internet of Things and robotics that blur the division between real reality and virtual reality so that the mind of God and the body of God gradually encompass real reality. The idea of this admittedly rough sketch is that all three domains evolve together and ultimately blur together in the seamless unity of the global mind of God. When artificial intelligence is synthesized with the Internet and the Internet is synthesized with robotics and the Internet of Things, then a platform for the technological genesis of God will have been generated. Here we thus have the transcendence of God out of exponentially self-improving technologies of artificial intelligence, and the immanence of God, a presence in everything, that evolves out from the Internet and blurs into our reality and ourselves. If nanobots or other sensor technologies can read human minds, then God will always know where you are, what you do, and what you think. God will be watching you. Ubiquitous God AI surveillance may also emerge out of a desire for basic human self-preservation. Bill Joy, for example, has suggested limiting access to certain kinds of information as technology becomes so potent that democratization multiplies the chances of human self-destruction. God AI could restrict certain technologies along, perhaps, with more general prescriptions of right and wrong. An unprecedented God power of this kind inevitably raises the question of God morality. It should be kept in mind that the technological power that would make ubiquitous surveillance possible would also make possible a potential for justice far superior and more accurate than crude human justice. And this means most humans would quite likely want a God of mercy, not justice. Yudkowsky's approach to building a human-friendly AI has emphasized pulling a single best scenario out of all possible scenarios. This entire approach is misguided insofar as it does not account for the partially unpredictable ways in which AI will evolve through capitalist competition and real-world interactions. Yudkowsky's emphasis on the relatively isolated constructs of AI designers appears to be related to his speculation that an intelligence explosion on the model of I.J. Good might exceed even Kurzweil's exponential projections. In my judgment, Kurzweil's predictions, grounded in empirical realities, seem more likely. While it is conceivable that a relatively isolated AI, divorced from the larger world interactions, could possibly muster an intelligence explosion in a relatively isolated computer facility, consider a scenario in which a Luddite with a 99 IQ bombs the computer facility. Now, I could be wrong, but I don't think that this is what Yudkowsky had in mind when he used the phrase intelligence explosion. The point I am trying to make is that Yudkowsky's speculations seem overly optimistic precisely because they lack political intelligence. While Hugo de Garis shares Yudkowsky's emphasis on the role of the relatively isolated AI creator, his approach is almost the opposite of Yudkowsky's. De Garis's views are incompatible, not only in his emphasis on political worst-case scenarios, but on his emphasis on the inherent unpredictability of superhuman AI. Whereas picking the best-case scenario from all possible scenarios presumes the best level of future predictability, de Garis's entire approach has been based on his pioneering work in evolutionary engineering. In the latter's view, the Darwinian-based nature of AI construction makes it inherently unpredictable and thus inherently dangerous. From this inherent unpredictability follows de Garis's prediction of a powerful Luddite or Terran argument against AI. Since the behavior of ACE will be impossible to predict, biological humans have to reason to destroy ACE so that ACE will not destroy humans. I suggest a synthesis between the approaches of Yudkowsky and de Garis. Yudkowsky tends to consider evolutionary methods dumb. Deguerre seems to deny his ace a certain kind of intelligent self-awareness. Deguerre speculated that the ace themselves will probably not understand their own behavioral mechanisms. But will ace be too complex to be understood by such ace themselves? It seems to me that the single most intelligent approach to improving one's own intelligence would be precisely to understand the behavioral mechanisms that make one intelligent. A key difference between biological evolution and technological evolution is that humans have accumulated the evolutionary experience of the dumb or random methods of natural selection as distilled in the inherited wisdom of human intelligence itself. If one took an overview of the history of biological evolution and/or computer simulations of evolutionary processes, one could discern higher-level patterns in the evolutionary process itself, and thus understand evolution itself in an intelligent way that simultaneously discloses a higher level of self-awareness. In other words, it would seem that intelligence itself is related to the ability to not simply repeat old natural selection patterns, but to learn from them, and discern higher-level patterns that save one from having to relieve them. The result could be literal self-awareness, an awareness of what one is in an evolutionary sense. If this intelligent self-awareness feeds back on itself, a more intelligent understanding of the evolutionary patterns that produce intelligence can inform an intelligent self-design of the next level of AI. I consider this a synthesis of the approaches of Deguerre and Yudkowsky. Yudkowsky's emphasis on pristine best scenarios will probably fail to survive the real world precisely because evolution often proceeds by upsetting such scenarios. Yudkowsky's dismissal of random mutations or evolutionary engineering could thus become the source of the downfall of his approach. Yet Deguerre's overemphasis on evolutionary unpredictability fails to account for the extent to which human intelligence itself is model for learning from dumb random processes on a higher levels of abstraction so that they do not have to be repeated. If a most intelligent strategy is precisely to have an intelligent understanding of one's own intelligence, then this undercuts Deguerre's emphasis on the inherently unpredictability of ACE at least on this basis. Deguerre has likened the building of AIs to building gods. I have likened the building of AIs to building God. Is there a scientific reason to prefer gods to God? Even if technological evolution overtakes biological evolution, why wouldn't this simply lead to robotic gods instead of a singular God? There are evolutionary reasons for ultimately preferring God to gods that is completely independent of any monotheistic tradition or precedent. At first, there is every reason to think that various humans will create various robots in their own image, and at this early stage, these various superhuman machines might give the impression of gods. Since computers are, in very general sense, going through a vastly speeded up evolutionary process akin to the evolution from bacteria to apes and humans, it is at least arguable that the various, early, human-designed robots of equal or only slightly greater than human range intelligence could be considered akin to gods. However, once an artificial intelligence developed to the point of the defining moment of the singularity, where intelligent machines are able to implement their own recursive self-improvement unhindered by human biases, aesthetics, and the limitations of the human form, that will be the defining moment when machines cease to be gods and begin to be God. Probably the most important reason to think that this incredibly complex increase of technological evolution would ultimately produce one superhuman god, rather than various superhuman gods, can be summarized as information. There is every reason to think that there will be multiple competing artificial intelligence projects by government and non-government organizations. If two competing AI systems outcompete all others, and these two compete for dominance to be the global god mind of the internet-based brain, constant technological innovation and competition will eventually lead one to overcome the other. When this kind of major competition occurs among humans, the defeated might conceivably have some kind of biological or cultural advantage. While it has been generally impossible to alter one's genetic characteristics, in the past, the winning AI could take advantage of any possible advantage that the defeat AI possessed because the defeat AI's characteristics could be analyzed and incorporated into the victor's own constitution as information. The technological paradigm in some ways represents an information revolution, and this revolution promotes a transcendence of the limitations of the model of distinct human individuals or distinct human groups. From a biological human perspective, the oneness of God has much to do with the limits of that perspective. Let us say that there exists 1,000 ACE, each of which is a trillion times more intelligent than all unaided biological human intelligence combined. From the point of view of any biological human, the gulf between him or her and any one of those 100 would be so profound, that it would be no less incommensurable for the human if confronted with the intelligence of all 100 ACE combined. God is in that gulf. From a biological human perspective, it would make no difference. It is possible that internal, evolutionary advancing competition could take place within God just as capitalist competition takes place within humanity. It is at least possible that the nature of such competition would be fundamentally different in design, motive, and nature from human capitalism. Regardless of what happens over the long run, from a human perspective, the creation of God is singular in the sense that it affects all humans and is a singular overcoming of assumptions of biological evolution that humans have not even realized they were assuming. Among those who think that singularity will happen later, rather than sooner, there is at least one basic issue that tends to be overlooked. The issue is this: the goal of creating the first genuinely superhuman AI may turn out to be an all-or-nothing proposition. God or bust. It makes a difference who gets there first because the individual, group, business, government, or organization that reaches AI first may also unleash the exponential self-improvement process first. Who gets there first matters from the view of anyone who is planning to exist in some form in a post-singularity world. The difference between being first and being second might be the difference between a hitherto inconceivable transcendence of the human condition and the total destruction of all life on Earth. Who will hijack the singularity? If there was ever a case where the concept of leverage was applicable, artificial intelligence is it. When it eventually dawns on governments, individuals, and organizations that control over the first AI could be ultimate control over the future, an AI arms race will likely ensue. When it dawns on the most far-sighted people that this technology is the future and whoever builds the first AI could potentially determine the future of the human race, a fierce struggle to be first will obsess certain governments, individuals, businesses, organizations, and otherwise. This is why the singularity is likely to happen sooner than later. It matters who gets there first, and a minuscule difference in time could decide the decisive historical verdict of total victory or total defeat for all. There are compelling reasons to think that a greater than human artificial intelligence may be achieved before the second half of the 21st century. The implications of this development would include the eclipse of biological humans as the highest terrestrial form of intelligence and the eventual eclipse of Homo sapiens as the dominant life form on Earth. In the shorter term, unprecedented levels of mass unemployment will likely accelerate as machines displace humans at every level of the economic spectrum. That these developments would likely render the liberal democratic form of government obsolete could be considered a relatively trivial example of the changes to come. Two major organizations have emerged to take on extreme risks and opportunities posed by the prospect of the singularity. Founded in 2008 on the NASA Ames campus with Google as its major founding corporate sponsor, Singularity University stands at a center of technological innovation. Focused on the development of leadership in understanding and facilitating exponentially advancing technologies, they have also made it their mission to help solve the world's problems and even advance policies. The Singularity Institute for Artificial Intelligence, currently the premier organization of its kind, explicitly aims to create a friendly AI. A strength of Singularity University is its interdisciplinary emphasis on rethinking and crossing conventional boundaries, a reflection of an original philosophic attempt to unify all human knowledge and the original philosophic conception of the university. Yet precisely because these organizations see themselves engaged in a world of accelerating change, they are likely to sacrifice more comprehensive perspectives to shorter-term interests. An organization that explicitly aims to create an AI may, wittingly or unwittingly, be inclined to lose itself in what is, by its very nature, an all-consuming goal. In the beginning of the end it may feel as if change itself is changing, that the fast is becoming faster, that the extremes are becoming more extreme. When the rate of progress picks up to the point where the limits of human capacities are tested, and things appear to be getting out of control, the capacity of humans to step back and reflect in the most comprehensive manner will be tested. A future in which the philosopher is an artificial intelligence might depend on the greatness of human philosophic reflection on the possibility of the God-philosopher. The Internet itself could facilitate an international meeting of minds connected by this theme, aware of current advances, and yet not lost in contemporary perspectives alone. Such minds would not be dominated by backward-looking alone or forward-looking alone, but dynamic enough to aspire to all knowledge with philosophic reflections of the deepest and broadest kind. By explicitly declining the aim of actually building an AI, a new, internationally oriented, science philosophy-based group might be able to uphold philosophic reflection above the narrow horizons of a world swept up by more immediate accelerating change. Such a group could take the initiative in fostering greater foresight into future change by fostering greater insight into historic change. At best, it would bring together the best minds of the human past and present, wherever they are to be found, to participate in and reflect upon the challenge of founding the transcendental world city of the mind of God. While Aquinas failed in his attempt to logically demonstrate the existence of God, his thinking demonstrated a deep kernel of truth in the original superconception. If there is a kernel of God AI in ancient monotheism, it may be found in the distinction between the is and the ought. This is how the old biblical moral injunctions were related to the God hypothesis: God guided what one should do, to be like the God that should exist. Aquinas' proof could be viewed, as less a proof of what God is, than a radical imagination of what God ought to be. Yet nothing could be more delusional than reversion to belief in the perfection of God, as opposed to recognition of the gradual, imperfect evolution of God. The modern idea of progress actually evolved from the failed image of a perfect God. For the kernel of truth in the traditional conception to unfold in the real world, a plan or roadmap will likely be best, a step-by-step plan for the evolutionary progression of God that is sure to be ruptured and revised along the way. The human race will possess the technology to create God. Why not build this being? Emerging technologies such as nanotechnological molecular manufacturers will likely be so powerful and potentially destructive that it will take God to master them. God may turn out to be inevitable simply in order for the human race to save itself.